Holmes. All right. Wait, here we go. Okay. Hi, welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada, Tomato, Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994 and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
Well, we open, and this is such a 1980s.
This week we're doing the Naval Treaty.
That's right. Yes, sorry. Yes, we're doing the Naval Treaty. So this is such a typical 1980s kind of style of British like TV making. Without any context, we're opening on a terrible thunderstorm, and then the camera pans on these two creepy looking statues. And
it is a lovely little scene though.
Yes, it is. And then a carriage pulls up and a man is inside screaming, "There's nobody there! Treachery! Ruined! England!"
Yeah, you almost think he's being kidnapped because they're dragging him towards this large house.
Yep.
And he's screaming the whole way.
Exactly. Yeah. So it looks like something nefarious is happening. And
oh
then,
my God, England!
Yes. Then we're back to 221B, where Holmes is titrating some very colorful liquids.
Red and blue and purple.
Yes, orange and purple. The orange one is boiling. And then Watson is knocking and calling, "Holmes, Holmes." And Jeremy Brett looks absolutely pissed because he's being interrupted.
It looks like he's kind of frustrated anyway. I guess you can tell by his hair how he's feeling. And his hair is done, but it doesn't look like visitor ready kind of thing.
Right. No, it's not slicked back in that way.
Yeah.
It's sort of floppy. Yeah. And apparently, according to the original story, by this point, Watson has been married a few months. But the show doesn't tell us this. It's just...
Yeah, the show is wise in not really doing anything with Mary Morstan. They'll eventually do the Sign of Four, but I think that's well after the main series ended.
So it's like Watson hasn't been there a while, and we don't know exactly why.
And then this, Holmes has just locked the door. Watson just never seen. Maybe he finished his test with Watson's checkbook.
Yes. The camera kind of begins to zoom out, and we see that 221B is a mess. There's like half-eaten apple, and all kinds of like crap lying around.
All over this floor.
Yep. And Holmes opens the door and he says, "You come in a crisis." And he goes back to his liquids. and he tells Watson to help himself to tobacco from the Persian slipper. So this is the first time in the series that we hear about the Persian slipper and the tobacco.
Yeah, that's where Holmes famously kept his
tobacco.
But we also see the VR that was shot into the wall, and
yes,
that's the first time we see it, right?
It is, yes, because Watson first notices the gun on the sofa emptied of bullets, or their shell casings, and then he sees the wall with the VR shot into it. So Holmes has obviously not been in a good state.
No.
And so Holmes gets out a piece of litmus paper and dabs a little of the purple liquid onto it, and says, "If it turns red, it's a man's life." And it turns red. So then he yells for Mrs. Hudson to
Mrs. Hudson! Instead, there's got to be a bell pull in there. But he only ever summons her by yelling and shouting her name until she rolls her eyes. It's got to be charging like 300 times the going rate for rent.
Absolutely. And once she's up there, he tells her to find Billy, which is presumably Billy Wiggins.
One of the Baker Street irregulars.
Yes, the Baker Street irregular leader. To send some telegrams. And then he throws himself into an armchair and kind of pouts at the smallness of the case he just solved.
Watson has a letter, though.
Yes, Watson has a letter from an old school friend that he gives to Holmes. His friend Percy Phelps has an excellent job, courtesy of his uncle, who is a lord, at the Home Office. At
Nepo
school,
baby.
sorry?
Nepo baby.
Yes. So at school, he was bullied because he came from a prestigious family. And Holmes is very disapproving of the bullying.
Yes.
And he notes that the handwriting of the letter is a woman's.
He
And
doesn't explain how he knows that, and Watson keeps insisting
that it's a man's. It has to be. Yeah. And then he says the woman has, for good or evil, an exceptional nature. At which point Watson grins like he's, I don't know, a wolf, you know? He says, "You're interested."
I love how Holmes can tell that from the handwriting.
I know, yeah.
It's the way she does her S's.
Or, right, yes, exactly. So Holmes is interested, and then they bicker about who has more important cases to attend to.
Yeah, Watson starts with my practice, and Holmes gets all passive aggressive. Oh, well, if your case
Yeah,
is
exactly. Yes.
mine. He doesn't
My
let that go, by the way. It comes back later.
It does. It does. My legitimate work, Watson says. But after Holmes wins that argument, he yells again, "Mrs. Hudson, hot water!"
What does he get the hot water for? Does he ever say?
Presumably to wash and shave
Okay.
for the trip.
Because that seemed to be a joke towards the end.
Yes. Yes. So they are about to go visit Percy Phelps at his family home in Woking, which is on the outskirts of London, and now is most famous as the city where the Pizza Express that Prince Andrew claimed to have visited in his famous interview. But back in the day, it was almost like a suburb or even more countrified.
Mm-hmm.
We see these beautiful landscapes as they arrive. Just gorgeous.
I love the garden at this house.
Yes. Yes. And they use the garden a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So they get there and they're met with Percy's soon-to-be brother-in-law named Joseph. And Holmes does his little deduction of you're not a member of Percy's family. And Joseph looks down and says, "Oh yeah, my monogram. Of course, it's very easy for you to tell."
Yeah, he's basically wearing a name tag.
Right. And they go inside, and Percy is swooning on a sofa in a dressing gown.
This man.
Yes.
With this man.
Holding hands with his fiancée, Annie Harrison, who's nursing him through his whatever. And I did find out from the annotated Sherlock Holmes that the manor house where Percy's family supposedly lived was based on an actual residence that was demolished like soon after this story was written.
Oh.
And a Presbyterian church is there instead, which is kind of funny when we get to Garreau. So Percy tells Holmes that his uncle, Lord Holdhurst, has become foreign minister and has entrusted him with delicate missions, which he's always handled successfully. But 10 weeks prior, Holdhurst called Percy into his office, and wow, those mutton chops on Holdhurst. I mean, the facial hair in this episode alone is pretty incredible. Between Watson's mustache and Percy's mustache and these mutton chops, and then Joseph has a beard and mustache.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Holdhurst calls him in regarding a naval treaty between England and Italy. Nothing must be leaked, especially because the French and the Russians are dying to know what's in it. And it turns out, according to the annotated Sherlock Holmes, there was in fact an actual secret treaty between England and Italy that year, in the year the story was written, kind of dividing up. It wasn't about the Mediterranean, which in the show, that's what the treaty was about, but in real life, dividing up parts of the Middle East. And
that makes more sense.
Right, yes, where Italy would get Libya and England would get Sudan, but the French were also in the process of colonizing Sudan, and the Russians were like the third largest navy in the world after France and England. So it was like the pieces on the chessboard were being moved around and aligned to support all of this colonialism that was going on. So Holdhurst gives the treaty to Percy, and it's the only copy, and it needs duplicating, with the caution that this has to be done after everyone else has left the office, so no one sees him doing it. So when he's done, he's supposed to lock the documents up at his desk and give them both to Holdhurst in the morning. So he waits out his colleague Garreau, who at first appears to be in no hurry to leave. So it's clearly going to be a late night for Percy. And then Garreau finally leaves and says, if Percy keeps working late, he'll lose the affections of his fiancée. And Percy says something like, well, don't think you're going to step in. And Garreau says, oh no, I have my Daphne. So the document is long and it's written in French. And Percy tells Holmes that he really wants to meet his brother-in-law so the two of them can catch the 11 o'clock train to Woking. So he's under some time pressure. So he rings for coffee because he's starting to get tired. And usually the commissaire would come up and answer the call, but it turns out it's his wife. And she's the charwoman. She does the cleaning in the nights after everybody's gone.
Yeah, she looks very unimpressed with it. What do you want?
Right, yes. She's very grumpy. And then she says she'll tell her husband and she disappears. And then Holmes asks if he'd ever seen this woman before, and Percy says no, probably because she only came around at night after he was gone to clean the offices. And the coffee was taking a really long time, so Percy goes down to see what's going on.
And Holmes, I think, asks if he locked up the document when he left.
He said, leaving the room unguarded.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I can understand, like, you're the only one there aside from these two.
The help.
Yeah. So, like, I can understand feeling like it's safe to just go downstairs. That makes sense. I still feel like I think he should have just been really paranoid. I'm a very paranoid person. lock it in the desk anyway.
I know. Well, he was under strict instructions.
Yeah, to do that anytime he left.
Right. So Percy confirms that, yes, he left the room unguarded and says he found the commissaire asleep in his little booth at the foot of the stairs. And as they're talking, that's when the bell from Percy's office rings again. And Percy's not ringing it.
Yes. It's a ghost.
So they run back upstairs. And at that point, the document's gone. And then Annie at that point pipes in and says, Percy's drawn a map of the building. And they think the thief must have come in the side door while Percy was out in the front with the commissaire. But there's no place for the thief to hide. So
therefore must have gone out the side door then.
Exactly.
And part of the question is, why did the thief ring the bell?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because that would have been a stupid thing for a thief to do.
Right.
But Percy and the commissaire run outside yelling, but they didn't find anybody in the rain. And then he hears Big Ben ring 9:45, the 3/4 bell. And in the original story, Percy says he hears the bells from a neighborhood church, which, I mean, he's in Westminster. It would have been either, so Westminster Abbey, it would have been either Westminster Abbey or the smaller church on the grounds of Westminster Abbey called St. Margaret's. But in real life, Big Ben, being Big Ben, would have drowned out both of these. So the show goes with Big Ben because, yeah. Let's cut the crap. So there's no one around except the commissaire's wife. And then they run back out onto Whitehall, but nobody's there at all. And the constable at that point alerted Scotland Yard, and then Percy kind of fell apart.
For 9 weeks.
For 9 weeks, yes. And he does it again in the moment. And Watson and Annie give him some kind of medication, and he kind of passes out. At which point, Holmes leaves the room to go talk to Joseph. He's in Woking to accompany his sister because she came to Woking to meet Percy's family before they went to America. So Percy's family is now in America, and it's just the three of them plus the servants in the house. And I felt like Joseph was really bossy with servants that weren't his, telling the maids what to do.
I suppose it kind of makes sense since Percy has decided he lives on the sofa now that Joseph would take over.
Yeah, and he didn't intend to stay all summer, but then he calls it Percy's smash. Percy's breakdown happened, so now he's supporting his sister as she nurses Percy. And Holmes asks him how he can manage being away from work for 9-10 weeks. And Joseph tells him he dabbles in stocks, and he's the oldest, so he's going to inherit his father's business, so he's got some independence. And then Holmes asks Joseph if he'd intended to meet Percy at Waterloo for the 11 o'clock train, because that's what Percy told Holmes. But Joseph says that while he knew Percy intended to take that train, he himself wasn't expecting to meet him because he was having dinner with his stockbroker. So Holmes returns to the sick room to ask about the charwoman, the commissaire's wife, and Percy says that he and the constable hired a cab to go to the commissaire's house, which we don't know where in London that is.
Not one of the richer parts of London.
Definitely not. No, it's kind of a hovel. And the oldest daughter answers the door and says their mother's working, and she'll be home in 10 minutes. So when the woman comes home, she's terrified to see a constable there and a gentleman. And she immediately rushes to this canister on a shelf. And the constable grabs the canister thinking the documents are in it, but they're not. It's just, money that she's put by because they've had trouble with the bailiffs. So they're really poor.
Yeah.
But the constable still arrests the charwoman and takes her away.
Well, he takes her to be searched. So I guess that means kind of a strip search.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're probably, I assume, going to call a woman in to do it.
Yeah.
So Percy's left there with these several girls. We're sitting at a table, all just looking at him like he's suddenly going to produce a bunch of food for them.
I know. And their faces are all smudged, and they look really unfortunate. And Percy goes and searches through the kitchen, and he doesn't find anything.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, Joseph, on his own steam, came back to Woking from the city. Annie had already gone to bed. She was awakened by Percy having his fit. So the important thing here is that while Percy's family was away in America, the upstairs rooms, the bedrooms, were being redecorated. So people were staying downstairs, including Joseph. But Joseph was sent up to Percy's old room, and the room he'd been in was converted to a sick room. And Percy's been raving for 10 weeks in the sick room.
10 weeks.
10 weeks, 9 weeks. They keep going back and forth.
Yeah, they do, don't they? There's this mysterious week that might or might not exist.
Exactly. And at this point, Jeremy Brett, it's not even Holmes, it's Jeremy Brett. He picks up a rose and he poses with it. And he delivers a soliloquy about how lovely flowers are. And he even gets a little religious, which is very out of character.
I feel like Holmes is like he's aware of religion. He knows how to make analogies to people who might be more religious.
Yeah. Well, he's educated.
Yeah.
And back then, if you were educated, like say you went to Eton and then to university, and I don't know if we know if Holmes finished university, but it was a very Anglican education. So you were getting religion in the schools.
Yep.
And Annie starts getting impatient, and she begins questioning him, and basically sort of bitches him out and says, "Go back to London and test your conclusions."
And he gives her this smile.
Yes.
Like it's like a shark smile. You're just like,
Yes.
wow, look at all those teeth. It occurred to me that we'd never seen Holmes really smile before. Like, you know, he's always been like closed mouth, lip twitches, but never
Right.
these open smiles.
Or if he's smiling, it's in triumph, you know, or he'll do a ha or a pa. So, you know,
we've never seen him smile like this.
Not like that. No, it's creepy.
Yes, it is.
And then Holmes tells Phelps not to indulge in false hopes because the case is really complicated. And one thing I remembered, you know, he picks up this rose and he does this whole speech that Holmes in retirement raised roses at his home in Sussex Downs.
Well, it was
Roses and bees.
the beekeeper, wasn't it? Yeah.
He was both. He was raising rare roses and he was keeping bees.
I just remember the bees, but yeah, the roses make sense because you need something to keep the bees around.
Right. Yeah, no, it's in BBC Sherlock. Janine says that after selling her story to all the tabloids, she bought a country house in Sussex Downs, and she says, it's got beehives, but I'm getting rid of those. So
and this is why we have a bee problem now.
Yes, absolutely. Janine's fault.
Let's blame Janine.
So then Holmes and Watson are walking along the street, and it's really not clear to me where exactly they are. They're in town, but it's hard to know which town. Are they in Woking or are they back in London? And they both look very elegant. They've got their walking sticks and everything. And Holmes is chasing ruffians away from the fruit stand on the corner.
Well, I think by ruffians, it was just like Holmes clearly meant ruffians, but they just looked like little kids who didn't have a lot of money.
Exactly. Yes. And they weren't obviously part of the Baker Street irregulars, or he would have given them money or something. So Holmes asks Watson who benefits from the treaty being stolen. And Watson says, well, the French ambassador and the Russian ambassador. And then Holmes says, well, possibly Lord Holdhurst himself might benefit. And Watson's like, oh, surely not. Because, you know, Lord Holdhurst is the epitome of honor.
Yeah, Watson is very queen and country.
Very trusting of quote unquote authorities. Yeah, he is. He's ride or die for queen and country. And then they get into a cab and they go to the side entrance of the Foreign Office. And while they're riding, Holmes asks the cabbie to find the cab that dropped someone off at the same place 9 or 10 weeks ago at 9:30 in the evening.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Right. And like, yeah, clearly the cabbie's going to know.
Yeah, let me check my computer and get back.
Right. Dispatch, can you tell me? And then Watson and Holmes meet Garreau. And this is a really funny scene. Holmes starts interrogating Garreau on the Frenchness of his name. And Garreau very defensively says, well, it's not French exactly, it's Huguenot or Huguenot, which were basically French Presbyterians.
Like, okay, but that's French though.
Right. But no, they made a distinction. They really did. And that's a callback to the Presbyterian church that replaced the manor house. But Watson very helpfully says, Holmes has a French grandmother.
Thanks.
Holmes really looks irritated with Watson. at that moment. Like, you're letting my personal life in here. And I mean, like, this is like the second or third time he's been annoyed with Watson's sort of little interjections. So they're waiting for Detective Inspector Forbes, and Garreau leaves. And Holmes is like racing around the room and confirming there's no secret entrance, no secret exit. Watson asks why.
This was where he threw himself on the floor and looked at the carpet, right?
Yes, and he said there cannot be any trapdoor here.
Because there's a carpet on top of it.
Because the carpet's too thin and you would see it through the carpet. And then Watson asks the obvious, why would someone ring the bell? Was it the thief out of bravado or someone with the thief trying to prevent the crime? And then Forbes arrives, and he's very belligerent, which does not intimidate Holmes in the least.
No, Holmes gives him that same kind of smile that he gave Annie earlier.
Yes.
Very toothy grin.
And tells him to work with him and not against him. So immediately Forbes says that the commissaires...
But in very condescending terms. Like, you're young.
Yes.
You're inexperienced.
Exactly. Yeah, he mentions that that he's low on the totem pole.
Yeah. So let me do this,
Yes.
and then I'll give you the criminal.
And the credit.
Mm-hmm.
Because Forbes is accusing Holmes of taking all the credit, and Holmes gives him like chapter and verse. You know, these are the 49 times I didn't.
Yes, out of the 53 cases that
Yes. So at that point, Forbes says that the commissaire is an okay guy, but the wife, the charwoman, drinks. And that Garreau has been shadowed ever since the theft happened, and there's nothing to implicate him. So Holmes and Watson go down the hall and visit Lord Holdhurst next. And Holdhurst says he can't protect his nephew precisely because of their family connection. He's a man of honor, so he can't do nepotism any more than he already has by hiring him.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But he can't protect him from something like this. And
He
Holmes
doesn't seem all that impressed with his nephew, although given the circumstances, that's understandable. But you kind of get the feeling, especially the way that he gave the initial instructions to Percy, you know, it's like he was talking to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
That, you know, even though Percy was supposed to be like top of his class and very smart, that, you know, he's also the guy who faints at the first time.
Yes. And he was bullied.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is a weakness. It's, yeah. If you're a lord, if you're from a aristocratic family, you can't be a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And Holmes points out that 9 or 10 weeks after the theft, there's been no news from the French or the Russians, meaning that whoever stole the treaty is keeping it. And then they go back to 221B for half a second, and Holmes points out that Holdhurst is not rich. He's resold his shoes.
And Watson gasps in shock.
Yes. But he's a lord. And the implication is that perhaps Holdhurst has his own motive for stealing the treaty. So he asks Watson to go back with him to Woking tomorrow. And at that point, he throws him a bone about the prior insults to his legitimate work, and which Watson gratefully accepts. And that night, Percy declines his medication. And we see someone...
Because he's feeling so much more hopeful now that Mr. Holmes is on the case. So he's feeling better.
Yeah, he is feeling better. And we see more of that the next day. But that night, we see someone attempting to enter his sick room from the window. And Percy ordinarily wouldn't wake up, but he hadn't taken his meds. So he does, and he sees a hooded figure running off when he goes to the window. So the next day, Percy is ambulatory and dressed, looking very fine, obviously feeling better. And Holmes and Watson come in, and Joseph says he's found the place where the intruder came in, and Holmes dismisses it as being old damage to a garden wall. And then he starts prowling around in that kind of balletic way he has, looking for clues in the vicinity of the window. And I guess while the rest of them are befuddled or something, he dashes into the sick room where Annie's sitting and makes her promise not to leave that room all night. And then seconds later, Joseph, through the window, asks her to take a walk outside, and she says no. So Holmes asks Percy to come to London for the night, and Percy's feeling so much better that he absolutely will. And Watson is going to tend to Percy, any medical needs, whatever, over the course of the night, while Holmes remains in Woking. They all set off in a carriage, and then Holmes jumps off the carriage, mystifying them.
Bye.
And then he sits under a tree in the gorgeous countryside.
Yeah, with a beautiful view, and just takes a nap.
Yeah, until dark. And Annie stays in the sick room while Joseph keeps trying to persuade her to leave.
Yeah. Do you want dinner? No, I'm not hungry. I mean, I would have said something like, yes, I'll dine in here. Thank you.
Right. Yes. Have the maid send up a sandwich or something.
Yeah.
She says she's enjoying her book.
I can enjoy my book and also eat at the same time.
Well, as if she couldn't enjoy her book in any other part of that house. But she says, force of habit. This is where I'm going to stay. And Holmes keeps watch. And he returns to 221B the next morning with a bandaged hand and a cough. So he's kind of staggering out of the carriage. And he speaks very briefly with Mrs. Hudson.
He's been wearing a hat. The door to the parlor, sitting room, is open, and Percy and Watson are both there. And Holmes takes off his hat and holds it up so that faces are shielded from view as he's talking to Mrs. Hudson.
Yep. So no one can lip read.
Yep.
So we don't know what he says to her. And then as he comes in, Watson begins grilling him about his hand and the adventure. And Holmes is like, I can't talk right now. I'm starving. I've been out in the country.
He's very Holmes-like.
Yes. And which is, I mean, the starving part, though, is unusual for him because he never eats. Right. So Holmes gets breakfast sent up. He urges Percy to try the breakfast that Mrs. Hudson has provided. She's standing there and he's saying, well, she's Scottish, so the breakfast is what it is, but it's going to be good anyway, so just have some. And
Percy keeps saying no. Try this dish. No.
Right.
Try one in front of you. No.
I can't possibly.
Holmes is finally like, you know what? Let me just take the cover off of this and show you your breakfast.
And there's the treaty. And then Percy gets hysterical. He starts laughing. He cannot stop.
Yeah, he starts dancing.
He's jumping up and down.
Yes. And everybody is laughing.
Yes.
With joy. They're not laughing at him. It's just his joy is contagious.
And it's a relief.
Yes. And then it's such a relief that he starts to get faint again.
Well, Watson gives him some brandy. And then Holmes gives Mrs. Hudson a little flower for her cooperation.
He'd had a flower in his lapel and takes it and hands it to her. Isn't that when she huffs something about Scottish breakfast?
Yes. And honestly, a Scottish breakfast is not that different from a full English. I mean, there's slightly different things, but basically it's the same, like eggs, bacon, sausage, and potatoes of some form. So that was purely uncalled for on Holmes's part. And then Holmes tells them how he did it. So he's watching over Annie in the sick room, hiding in a bale of hay.
Yes, that's his disguise in this episode. He's a bale of hay.
In the stable across the way. And at 2:00 in the morning, he hears a bolt being pushed back, and he watches as the hooded figure from before enters the sick room through the window. And we see shadows, right? And so we see the shadow of the person holding the treaty.
Yeah, the whole encounter is done in shadows. Like, we don't actually see it. We see close-ups of things like Holmes pulling pull a sword out of his cane, didn't he?
Yeah, he has a sword cane. Yeah. And the other guy
That
has
shadow of whatever, and the other guy looking up, a close up of that. But we don't actually, for whatever reason, that the action just wasn't filmed.
no, it's a shadow puppet show.
Yeah,
And Holmes,
it's Plato's shadows in the cave.
yeah, that's that too. Yeah, that's good. Holmes takes the hood off, and it's Joseph, Annie's brother, and Holmes tells him to run. And at that point, Watson interrupts and asks why. And Holmes,
Watson is horrified, as he tends to be when Holmes lets the bad guys go.
yes, or evades the law in general.
Yeah.
And Holmes says he didn't want the case reaching the courts. Because
this isn't something where you can really arrest the perpetrator, because the treaty was supposed to be secret.
Exactly.
And you can't try him without talking about the treaty.
Right.
And why somebody might want to steal it.
Yep. So the backstory is that Joseph, in meeting with his stockbroker, learned he'd lost a lot of money in the stock market, and he comes to see Percy, and at that point rang the bell in the office. But only then did he notice the document. So ringing the bell was a dumb frigging move, basically.
Yep. Also, he implied that he always had work at his father's.
Yeah.
Whatever. It was just the stocks gave him independence. So, like he wasn't. It's not like he was going to be homeless. He was just going to have to work for a while.
Yes.
Oh my God, the horror.
Well, his sister's marrying into an aristocratic family. So there's a certain amount of keeping up with the Joneses, I think.
Yeah, but would anybody even know?
Yeah.
Like they'd more be looking at the father than at him.
You would think. But that's, typical Conan Doyle. The motives don't have to be 100% copacetic.
It does also sort of paint Joseph as not really the greatest guy.
No.
Aside from the whole treaty stealing, it's just...
Yeah. So he steals it, and he puts it inside the sofa of the room where he's staying. But that night, Percy comes back delirious, and the room was immediately turned into a sick room, and Joseph, was banished upstairs. And he
couldn't get to it.
Right. He had no way of retrieving it. And Holmes, well, they asked, I think it was Watson, but it could have been, it had to have been Watson, was asking why didn't Holmes search the room thoroughly when they were there. And
Holmes was like, I'm sorry, did you look at that room?
Yes.
With no guarantee it was even in there. Like, where would I even start?
Well, and it's interesting because he does like he did with Irene Adler.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to let Joseph lead him to what Holmes was looking for.
Exactly.
He
didn't start a fire this time.
No, he didn't. He just threatened to slice someone with his sword cane. So Annie arrives, and Holmes reminds Percy that she doesn't know that her brother's a criminal. And Percy,
anyway, good luck telling her.
Well, Percy says he'll explain everything, but I was unclear as to whether or not he was going to fib to Annie.
Probably, yeah.
Keep everything secret and keep the peace in the family and all of that. And also to keep the secret internal so that, there's a risk if she knew that something would leak.
Yeah, I'm sure at some point she's going to be asking why he doesn't really want her brother to visit anymore.
Yeah, probably. But he's waving the treaty in her face. And at that point, Mrs. Hudson comes upstairs and yells, "Mr. Holmes, hot water!" And, that's the callback to when he was yelling at her for hot water at the beginning of the episode. And Holmes starts laughing and thanks her. And the episode ends with Percy waving the treaty in Annie's face.
It's a very 1980s kind of ending.
It very much is. I mean, the whole episode is so 1980s British TV. um and there's a lot, obviously we didn't talk about, like the maids at the manor house, and I mean there were a lot of them, or there were two and they were just always around.
Yeah, there were only two the last time, too.
Two seems to be the standard issue.
Yeah, we can afford two maids.
Right. One for upstairs, one for downstairs.
There's occasionally a maid at Baker Street, too, I think.
I'll have to look for that. Yeah, because for now we've only seen Mrs. Hudson. And I think we've only seen her in 2 episodes, no? Did we see her in
I remember.
I'm looking at my notes. Okay, here's the Dancing Men. I mean, we definitely saw her in Scandal in Bohemia.
Yeah.
No, we do not see her in the Dancing Men. She's not a part of that story. I think this was a good one, though. I mean, I'm easily sucked in by these stories.
Yeah, same.
But
if nothing else, Jeremy Brett is always fun to watch. This is one of those episodes that I mentally contrast David Burke and Edward Hardwicke. Like, I don't recall Holmes ever responding to Edward Hardwicke's Watson the way he does with Watson in this one.
I think that goes back to what you were saying about the chemistry between the two actors. I don't know. It was very clear to me that Watson was getting on Holmes's nerves in this episode, and I just wonder if that wasn't a Burke-Brett thing, that Burke was getting on nerves as they were filming. I mean, Brett is not the kind of actor who holds back.
Right.
I mean, for all of Holmes's, like, I deplore emotion, Jeremy Brett is like Mr. Emotion.
Yeah, you can always tell what Holmes is thinking.
Yes. I mean, he's constantly rolling his eyes or flinching or twitching. Or
I read somewhere that David Burke left because he felt like he wasn't getting enough to do. But you read and you're like, dude, you're Watson. Like,
right.
At the start of this.
Well, I mean, there were some of those kinds of stories flying around about Martin Freeman too. That he was unhappy being made out to be kind of the dumb one. And I know which he wasn't.
No, his Watson was very intelligent. But again, Watson is Watson.
Yes.
He's the narrator, but he's not the main character.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, David Burke actually is the father of the actor Tom Burke, who was one of my faves. I originally discovered him in the J.K. Rowling series, The Cormoran Strike, which I stopped watching when, the shit hit the fan. And
he was the main character? He
was Cormoran Strike, yeah.
Oh, I like him. He was also in that Three Musketeers series. He played Athos.
And he was in, I'm looking, yes, he was in the Three Musketeers. And he played Dazzle Jennings in The Crown, which is Princess Margaret's priest friend. That was a juicy role. And, he was in a cool movie. What was it called? Well, he was in Mad Max Furiosa.
Okay, there's the what is it?
The sequel with Anya Taylor-Joy. But he was also in a movie called The Wonder with Florence Pugh, about an Irish girl who seems to she's having a religious experience and she can survive without eating.
Oh God.
It's a good movie. It actually is a really good movie. And Florence Pugh is amazing in it.
And have you ever seen Midsummer?
No, I need to. It's
Yeah.
the ones I'm missing from the canon.
You would like.
I'm sure I would. I mean, I've read all the spoilers.
Okay, then you know what you're in for.
I do, which is why I haven't watched it. Oh, he also played Barbara Cartland's brother, who was an MP. I mean, I'm telling you, the aristocracy on this island is so tiny. You know, you say somebody has a last name and you know they're related to so and so and so and so.
Yeah.
You know, and the same is true with actors.
With actors, yeah. Well, there's that joke for a long time that all of the actors in England had been in either Love Actually or Harry Potter or both.
Yes.
That got everyone.
Yes. You can throw Game of Thrones in there too. Yeah. Which is kind of why I love British TV and film, because there's always a Wikipedia connection to go down a rabbit hole on.
Oh, here are the 5 other things I saw that actor.
Right. Yeah, I used to joke to my cousin that there were only 12 actors in England. Okay, so any other observations about this Naval Treaty?
I do not. Next week is The Solitary Cyclist.
I love that one. I mean, I know I say this after every single time you announce what it is. And I promise I'll get better about announcing at the top of the episode. But no, we're just going to dive in. You're going to guess what episode we're talking about.
We're learning our podcasting.
We are. And I'm
still trying to use words rather than gestures. This being an audio medium.
This is my argument for the video piece, because we can gesticulate wildly and people will know what we mean.
There's a series called, I think it's only 4 episodes, called Murder Rooms.
Oh.
That is a sequel to a movie called Dr. Bell and Mr. Doyle, which is, it's Holmes and Watson, but with Joseph Bell as the Holmes character and Arthur Conan Doyle as Watson. They're both pretty good. But the first episode of Murder Rooms is inspired by The Solitary Cyclist.
I will have to look at this. Arthur Conan Doyle is played by Charles Edwards, who again is one of my favorite actors. He's another one who's been in everything. He was in Downton Abbey. He was in The Crown. I saw some other movie recently from a while ago that he was in. He just keeps popping up. I don't know.
Ian Richardson plays Bell in both the movie and the TV series. Ian Richardson is one of my favorite actors. And he also played Sherlock Holmes in The Sign of 4.
Oh, yeah.
Which was not the first Sherlock Holmes adaptation I'd ever seen, but it was one of the first.
This is, wow. Okay. How have I missed him? I know I've probably seen him in a ton of things.
Ian Richardson?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you absolutely have. He was in... And now I'm gonna forget the name of it. That series that starred Kevin Spacey.
Oh, House of Cards.
Yes, he was in the original House of Cards.
Okay, which I still need to see.
I made you see it once, didn't I?
No, I tried to make you watch. Wait, no, you tried to make me watch something, but it wasn't House of Cards. It was was it? Yeah, no, it wasn't Yes Minister. Something. And I tried to make you watch The Thick of It, but you couldn't watch it because it made you nauseous because of the
yeah. It was pretty jittery.
It's very jittery. Such a good show though. Oh wow. And Helen Mirren dedicated her Oscar to Ian Richardson when she won it for The Queen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
because he helped her early in her career.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. This is why I love Wikipedia. Let's see who else. Oh, Charles Dance.
Yes.
Love him.
Mhm.
Love him.
He reminds me a lot of Ian Richardson, but like a cold version of Ian Richardson, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. But he is. I mean, God, I saw an episode of, or not an episode, I saw a version of Rebecca. It was a miniseries where he was
Yes.
playing
Yeah.
the husband. And that really brought out the creepiness of like the age difference.
And spoilers for Rebecca. So you're marrying a murderer, huh? Okay.
I mean, he did so well in The Crown as Mountbatten. And yeah, I mean, he was so good at the imperious kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
I think he played Lord Vetinari and some of the Terry Pratchett adaptations.
oh, okay. And he, of course, he was Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones. And that, I mean, I know you haven't seen it, but it's the very definition of imperious.
I feel like he does that without even trying.
I agree. Yes. Oh, he does a great bit. So there's a British show, and I know we're running almost over time, a British show that comes on periodically called Big Fat Quiz. And so it's a bunch of celebrities asking these panelists questions, and some of them are topical, some of them are not, but he always does the guess the celebrity biography, and it's him in an armchair in he's got a big fireplace, and it's one of these, you know,
Yes.
right, and candles next to him and a big volume in his lap. And he starts reading, and it's these horrible celebrity biographies from like people on Love Island and yeah, people on these British reality shows, or they're like page 3 girls from The Sun, or you know what. I mean, I know they don't do that anymore, but the equivalent, or you know, pop stars or something. And he reads in this very dignified voice. And it is the most hilarious thing when a celebrity is talking about shitting her underwear. It's read, you know, by this guy with this pompous way of speaking. It's really great. So I'd encourage you to catch. They're on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look him
I
up.
should watch one actually when I came down for Christmas that year before I got the flu. And yeah, and you weren't into it, but try and catch him. Just
Okay.
it's so funny that two people can be so into British shows and have such divergent tastes in a lot of ways.
And that's English TV bringing people together.
Exactly. Or splitting them apart.
Depending on the show.
Right. All righty. Well, let me stop the recording. And we'll see
you next week.
everybody again next week.
Bye.
Bye. Hold on. I'm going to edit this part out, I promise.
That's fine.
The problem is having 2 separate accounts. Stop recording. Okay.